The year was 1865, and the sun burned down upon the frontier town of Deadwood like a merciless overseer. The streets shimmered with heat, dust rising in lazy spirals with each step of a horse, each shuffle of a boot. On the makeshift platform outside the sheriff's office, a woman stood bound at the wrists, her figure framed by a sky bleach pale by noon. Clara Monroe's dress was torn at the hem, her hair matted from days without rest, yet her eyes, sharp and unyielding, held fast to the crowd. Dozens had gathered, ranchers, gamblers, merchants, wives clutching children, all staring as if spectacle were salvation from their own miseries. The sheriff, a broad man with his stomach straining against his leather vest, stood beside her, a folded sheet of paper in one hand. He wiped his brow with the back of the other and cleared his throat. "Clara Monroe," he declared, his voice carrying the weary authority of one who enjoyed the theater of punishment more than its burden. "Guilty of fraud, guilty of thieving from decent folk, guilty of land claim forgery." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding in approval, others exchanging doubtful glances. Clara said nothing. Her silence was a blade, cutting deeper than any words. A man near the front spat into the dust, his spurs jangling as he shifted. "Oughta hang her, Sheriff. Nothin' but trouble since the day she come here." Laughter followed, sharp and mean. Clara's gaze swept over them, taking in faces she once knew, faces that had shared bread with her, faces that had borrowed tools from a ranch, faces that had smiled when her cattle grazed fat and healthy. Now they looked at her as if she were less than the dirt beneath their boots. Her eyes lingered on one man in particular, Nathaniel Pike, a land baron whose reach stretched across the valley. His fine coat sat heavy on his shoulders, and the glint in his eye betrayed the satisfaction he took in her downfall. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, the very picture of respectability, yet she knew better. It was his lies that brought her here, his whispers in the ears of men too weak to stand against him. He had coveted her ranch, her independence, her refusal to bend. And when he could not buy her, he broke her with accusations, each one sharpened by his wealth. The sheriff folded the paper with exaggerated care, sliding it into his pocket. "This town don't want blood," he said, pausing for effect. "But it don't want you neither. You leave Deadwood at sundown. Exile Miss Monroe. And if you ever set foot here again, I'll see to it you swing." He gestured, and the deputy shoved her forward. Her knees buckled, but she steadied herself, straightening her back, chin lifting. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. The jeers began, cruel words hurled like stones. "Outlaw," one cried. "Snake-hearted witch," shouted another. Children hid behind their mother's skirts, peeking out with wide, fearful eyes. Clara's wrists ached from the rope, her skin raw where it rubbed. But her spirit did not falter. She breathed in the stench of sweat and whiskey, the dry rot of timber buildings, the metallic tang of iron horseshoes clinking against stone. Every sense told her she was alone, yet somewhere deep within a spark resisted. Her mind slipped back to the ranch. She saw her father's hands, weathered and calloused, guiding hers as they worked the soil. She heard his voice, "Asterisk, the land don't lie, Clara. Men do. But the land, she gives what you earn." Asterisk, he had died, with those words still fresh in her ears, leaving her with acres of dust and promise. She had poured her life into that earth, raising cattle, planting corn, mending fences with her own hands. And it had thrived until Nathaniel Pike set his sights on it. "Walk her out," the sheriff ordered. The deputy prodded her down the steps, the crowd parting like a tide of judgment. She kept her eyes ahead, though each insult cut deeper than a lash. A woman hissed through her teeth, "God'll see you punished." Clara met her gaze steady and fierce, and replied at last, her voice low but clear enough to carry. "God already has. You're just too blind to know who the guilty truly are." The woman recoiled as though struck. They dragged her past the saloon, where card players paused mid-game to watch, whiskey glasses suspended between table and lip, past the blacksmith's forge, where sparks flew in the air, catching briefly in the sunlight before fading like dying stars. Past the church, its bells silent, its preacher standing on the steps with a Bible clutched tight, unwilling to intervene. Clara saw all of it. The town she had once believed in, now laid bare in its cowardice. At the edge of Deadwood, they cut the ropes from her wrists and shoved her hard enough to send her stumbling into the dust. She caught herself before she fell, palms scraping against the ground. The deputy tossed a small canteen at her feet. "That's more kindness than you deserve," he muttered. The sheriff mounted his horse, casting her one last glance. "Best keep walking, Miss Monroe. Sun's still high. You'll want distance for nightfall." His horse turned, hooves striking the dirt with finality, and the men rode back into town, leaving her with nothing but heat and silence. Clara stood there, wrists burning, throat dry, eyes locked on the horizon. The land stretched endless before her, a vast expanse of sagebrush, stone, and mirage. Somewhere beyond lay water, shade, perhaps even hope, or death. She did not know, but choice had been stripped from her long before this moment. She bent, picked up the canteen, shook it, a meager slosh inside. Enough to tease, not enough to sustain. She took a long breath, the dust stinging her lungs, and straightened. The weight of exile pressed on her shoulders, but she carried it with a defiance none could see. Deadwood might call her outlaw. Pike might think her beaten. But Clara Monroe was not made to break. She turned her back on the town, the sun beating fire onto her neck, and stepped into the wasteland. One step, then another, each stride a vow. Whatever trials lay ahead, she would not yield. Behind her, Deadwood's bustle resumed, the crowd dispersing, life returning to its rhythm. But a few lingered, those who had doubted, those who had wondered if the woman on the platform might yet rise again. And somewhere among them, Nathaniel Pike smiled a thin, satisfied smile, certain he had won. He did not see the glint in Clara's eyes as she disappeared into the horizon. He did not hear the vow she carried in silence. He did not yet understand that exile was not an end, but a beginning. And so the land welcomed her with its cruel embrace, burning sun above, parched earth below, silence vast enough to swallow the weak. Yet in that silence, Clara felt something stir within her chest. It was not fear nor despair, but the quiet rhythm of resilience. They had tried to break her spirit, but the frontier itself would decide her fate. She pressed on, step by step, until Deadwood was a shadow behind her in the endless wild ahead. The desert did not welcome her. It took her in silence, its vastness swallowing the sound of her steps as though the land itself wished her gone. By the second day, Clara Monroe's lips cracked, her tongue thick with thirst. The canteen, so carelessly tossed at her feet, had long since run dry. She had rationed it as best she could, tilting back the final drops under a sky so wide and merciless it seemed to press her into the earth. Each swallow was a fleeting reprieve, gone before it had even begun. Her feet blistered against the rough earth, leather boots worn thin from years of work on the ranch. The sun branded her skin with its fire, each hour a trial. By night, the air grew sharp and cold, stars scattering across the heavens with a brilliance that mocked her fragility. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their cries carrying across the mesas like ghostly laughter. Clara hugged herself for warmth, crouched beside a rock outcrop, her breath fogging in the starlight. Sleep, when it came, brought no comfort. Each dream was filled with the platform, the jeering faces, and Pike's sly grin. She woke, with fists clenched, nails digging into her palms, as if holding the memory of her humiliation would give her strength. On the third morning, she stumbled toward the faint shimmer of green on the horizon. Her eyes watered, unsure if it was real or the cruel mirage the desert loved to play upon the desperate. But when the smell of wet earth teased her senses, hope surged. She dropped to her knees beside a narrow stream, plunging her hands into the water, scooping it to her lips with trembling urgency. It was warm, tasting of iron and silt, but to Clara it was salvation. She drank until her belly ached, then lay beside the bank, cheek pressed to the damp soil, tears mixing with the stream. For the first time since exile, she let herself weep. Her reprieve was short-lived. A low growl split the silence, sharp as flint. Clara froze. From the thicket across the stream, golden eyes glowed in the dappled shade. A mountain lion, lean from hunger, its ribs sharp against tawny fur. It stepped forward, muscles rippling beneath its skin, tail twitching. Clara's breath caught. She scanned for a weapon. Her hands found a fallen branch, brittle and uneven. She rose slowly, though it gripped tight, her heart hammering like a drum. The cat leapt. Dust exploded beneath its paws, claws outstretched. Clara thrust the branch upward, catching it across the snout. The impact jarred her arm, the branch snapping in half. She stumbled back, pain flaring in her shoulder as the beast landed, circling with a growl that vibrated in her bones. She had no time to think, only to move. Each lunge was met with desperate swings, each clawing strike tearing cloth, drawing blood. Her lungs burned, vision blurred. The lion sprang again, and she dropped low, ramming the jagged branch into its chest. A scream tore from her throat as the beast toppled, thrashing, then went still. Silence returned, heavy and absolute, broken only by her ragged gasps. Her arms shook as she collapsed beside the carcass. Blood seeped into the dirt, her own mingling with the animals. She pressed a hand to her side where claws had raked deep, warm liquid spilling through her fingers. For long minutes she lay there, the sky wheeling overhead, wondering if she would die by the stream, just another forgotten soul in a land that spared no one. But the memory of Pike's smirk rose again, stoking her rage. She forced herself upright. She would not give him that victory. By dusk, Clara had tended her wound with strips torn for a dress. She dragged branches into a crude fire, flames sputtering to life with a handful of flint she found in the lion's den. The smell of smoke curled upward, carrying with it a reminder of civilization, of hearth and home. She cooked strips of the lion's flesh, bitter and tough, but each bite steadied her. The firelight cast shadows across her face, illuminating eyes no longer dulled by exhaustion, but sharpened by survival. She whispered into the night, voice hoarse yet resolute, "You try to bury me, Nathaniel Pike, but I will rise from this ground stronger than before." The days blurred into a brutal rhythm. She walked by dawn, hunted what small game she could, drank from streams when fortune allowed. Her body grew lean, her skin hardened by sun and wind, her spirit tested with every passing mile. Yet each trial etched something new into her: patience, cunning, endurance. Where once she had been rancher bound by fence posts and family land, now she became something the wild itself carved, a survivor. It was on the 7th day that she collapsed near the banks of a swollen river. Her legs gave out, her body unable to push further. She lay sprawled on the mud, breath shallow, eyes closing against the rush of water. But before darkness claimed her, she heard boots crunching in the soil. When she woke, the smell of smoke and roasting rabbit filled her senses. She opened her eyes to see a man crouched beside a fire. His beard was dark and unkempt, streaked with gray, his face worn like leather, scars slashing across his cheek. He glanced at her as she stirred but said nothing, turning the rabbit on the spit. Clara's hand went to her side, finding her wound bound with fresh cloth. The man noticed and finally spoke, his voice rough, carrying the weight of war and solitude. "You'd have bled out by nightfall if I'd left you." She pushed herself upright, wary. "Why didn't you?" He shrugged, staring into the flames. "Maybe I don't like watching people die slow. Seen enough of that." "Name," she pressed. "Jonah Kane." He tore a piece of rabbit, chewing with measured indifference. "Ex-cavalry. Ex-many things. Ain't much else worth saying." Clara studied him, suspicion coiling tight. Men who appeared in the wilderness rarely came without reason, and trust was currency she could not afford. Yet she was alive because of him. She accepted the strip of meat he offered, chewing despite the knot in her throat. They ate in silence until Jonah spoke again. "You're running from something." His eyes flicked to hers, sharp despite the calm tone. Clara's jaw tightened. or toward it. Jonah gave a dry chuckle. Fair enough. That night, beneath a sky thick with stars, Clara lay awake by the fire, listening to the steady rhythm of Jonah's breathing. She did not know if he was salvation or another test, but she knew this. The desert had not broken her. The mountain lion had not claimed her. And if Jonah Kane was to be part of her journey, he would not see her as a broken woman cast out by her town. She turned onto her side, watching the embers glow, whispering a vow to herself, as much as to the stars, she would rise no matter what this land threw in her path. Deadwood had taken everything, but out here in the wilderness, Clara Monroe was forging something new. Clara Monroe rode back into Deadwood with dust in her hair and steel in her eyes. The sun bled low over the horizon, staining the town in shades of rust and fire, and with every clop of her horse's hooves the murmur of onlookers swelled. She was not the same woman they had cast out. The dress was gone, replaced by buckskin and a weathered coat. A rifle rested across her saddle. Her face bore scars from the wilderness, yet none could mistake the pride in her carriage, the unflinching defiance in her gaze. Jonah Kane rode at her side, broad shoulders hunched beneath the weight of his past. He said nothing, but the way his hand hovered near the worn grip of his revolver spoke for him. This was not a casual return. This was reckoning. The townsfolk poured into the street, whispers chasing each other like wildfire. She's back. Thought she was dead. Look at her eyes, Lord have mercy. Children clutched their mother's skirts. Men straightened as if bracing for storm. The saloon doors swung wide and gamblers spilled out, their dice and cards forgotten. Clara guided her horse to the center of the street and dismounted with measured grace, boots striking the ground like a judge's gavel. Nathaniel Pike emerged from the sheriff's office, his fine coat immaculate, his smile sharp as broken glass. He had not expected this. For a flicker of a moment his confidence faltered, but pride carried him forward. Well, he called, voice carrying easily. The desert spits you back, Clara Monroe. Should have known you'd crawl your way home. Clara stepped forward, her shadow long in the dying light. I didn't crawl, Pike. I walked, and every step brought me closer to this moment. Her words cut through the crowd, steady, unyielding. Jonah's eyes scanned the rooftops, the windows, the alleys. He knew Pike was never alone. The sheriff appeared beside Pike, sweat beading his brow. You ain't welcome here, Clara. Town banished you. You set foot here again, and it's the noose. Clara's laughter was quiet, cold. The noose belongs to men like you, Sheriff. Men who sell justice for coin. She turned her gaze back to Pike. You framed me. You stole my land, my name, and you thought exile would silence me. But it only gave me time to sharpen my blade. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Pike's jaw tightened. He waved a hand, and 3 armed men stepped into the street, guns glinting. The air thickened with tension. Jonah's revolver cleared its holster in a flash, steady in his grip. Clara's hand rested on her rifle, her stance that of a fighter who had faced the wilderness and lived. Careful, Kane, Pike sneered. You think you can protect her from me and mine? Deadwood belongs to me. Always has. Not tonight, Jonah said, voice low, edged with steel. The first shot cracked the silence. A puff of dust leapt at Clara's feet, the crowd scattering with screams. Clara swung her rifle up, sight steady, and fired. One of Pike's men fell hard, his gun clattering on the stones. Jonah's revolver barked twice, precise as clockwork, and another man dropped clutching his chest. The third hesitated, nerves betraying him. Clara's eyes locked on his. Walk away, she ordered. Trembling, he threw down his weapon and fled. Pike's mask slipped, fury twisting his features. You think you've won because you crawled back with a stray dog at your side? You're still nothing, Clara. Nothing but a ruined woman. Clara advanced, each step deliberate. The crowd hushed, watching as if the town itself held its breath. She lowered her rifle slightly, her voice carrying a weight that silenced even the sheriff. I was broken, Pike. I bled. I starved. I fought beasts with my bare hands. But every wound forged me stronger. And you, her eyes burned into his, you've done nothing but hide behind lies and hired guns. Pike's hand twitched toward his holster. Jonah shifted, but Clara raised her hand, halting him. "No, Jonah. This is mine." Time slowed as Pike drew. Clara moved with the instinct of survival honed in the wilderness. Her rifle rose, the world narrowing to the man before her. One shot split the air, echoing like thunder between the buildings. Pike staggered, eyes wide with disbelief, blood blooming on his chest. He fell to the dirt, gasping, reaching for a sky that did not care to take him gently. Silence hung heavy. The sheriff took a half step forward, then froze under Clara's stare. His lips parted, but no words came. The townsfolk emerged slowly from their hiding places, eyes wide, mouths agape. The woman they had spat upon, the woman they had exiled, now stood tall over the man who had ruled them through fear and deceit. Clara lowered her rifle, breath steady though her hands trembled faintly from the storm of adrenaline. She turned in a slow circle, meeting the eyes of those who dared to look. "You all watched as he branded me a criminal," she said, voice steady, carrying to the furthest ear. "You watched as I was cast out with nothing, and you cheered. But look at him now. Look at what truth does to men like Pike." The preacher stepped forward, hat in his hands, shame in his eyes. "Miss Monroe, we were wrong." Clara studied him, then the crowd, her jaw set. "I don't seek your apologies. I seek justice. My land will be mine again, and Deadwood must choose what kind of town it wishes to be, one ruled by cowards or one built by those willing to stand against them." For a long moment no one spoke. Then an old rancher raised his hat, voice trembling. "I'll stand with you, Clara." Others followed, voices rising like a tide until the street swelled with assent. The sheriff backed away, eyes darting, the weight of the crowd turning against him. He vanished into the throng, his authority dissolving like smoke. Jonah holstered his revolver, stepping to Clara's side. His gaze lingered on her, a flicker of pride breaking through his stoic mask. "You've done what most wouldn't dare." Clara met his eyes, exhaustion etched into her face, but her spirit unbroken. "No, Jonah. I did what I had to. The desert taught me that survival isn't enough. You have to fight for more." The firelight of dusk glowed in her eyes as she turned toward the horizon, her voice carrying a final vow. "They try to break me, but I rose stronger. And I'll keep rising until no one can be broken the way I was." The crowd stood silent, reverent, as Clara Monroe walked away from the body of Nathaniel Pike, her figure framed against the burning sky. The story of her exile had ended, but something greater had begun.